Hello and welcome back to F1 Every Week. I am your host Ben Wevel, and today I'm going to be rounding up the first race weekend of the season at Bahrain. We've had 98 days, 2 testing sessions, 10 car reveals, 2 new team principals, 2 new race directors, and 1 underwhelming FIA report since the last racing action in Abu Dhabi, in which Max Verstappen controversially took his championship victory to the dismay of Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. But F1 turned a leaf this weekend, with the first official racing action beginning at around 6 p.m. local time on Sunday the 20th of March. You can listen to the podcast on a number of streaming platforms, including Spotify and Apple Podcasts, all linked below. Now, without further ado, let's get into episode 48 and the first race roundup of 2022. This weekend began with the unfortunate news that Sebastian Vettel was the latest F1 driver to be hit by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that he would not compete in the Bahrain Grand Prix. In his place would come 3-time super sub for Aston Martin, Nico Hülkenberg, who filled in for both Lance Stroll and Sergio Perez at various points in the 2020 season. The German has been Aston Martin's reserve driver ever since he lost his seat with Renault at the end of 2019 and is still hunting his first ever F1 podium. Friday began with free practice 1, in which Pierre Gasly led the way, followed by the 2 Ferraris, Charles Leclerc having spun midway through the session at turn 11. Teammate Carlos Sainz also got into some hot water with Red Bull's Max Verstappen, who finished in 5th, the Spaniard having impeded a flying lap from the reigning world champion late on. George Russell, in 5th, suffered from porpoising early on in the session, a piece of bodywork flying off his car as he trundled down the main straight. Lance Stroll finished 6/10 back in P6, followed by Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso and Yuki Tsunoda. Sergio Perez was less impressive than his teammate in 10th, and Zhou Guanyu made it a decent first free practice session as a full-time driver in F1 with P11, 8.5 tenths off the pace. Esteban Ocon was in 12th, the Frenchman's early progress halted when his side pod flew off down the main straight, this major component carelessly not on tight enough. Latifi was in 13th, followed by Nico Hülkenberg, who marked his first day back on the job with a massive lock-up into turn 8. Albon was next in 15th, followed by a troublingly poor set of McLarens and the 2 Haas cars. Valtteri Bottas was in last place, only having completed 2 installation laps all session, reporting misfiring over the radio. Moving on to Friday afternoon and FP2, in which Verstappen achieved the best time of 1:31.9, again in front of the 2 Ferraris, and the Mercedes of George Russell. Fernando Alonso rounded out the top 5, followed by Valtteri Bottas, who managed to remove some of the gremlins of the morning session. Sergio Perez was in 7th, the Mexican having obstructed the running of Pierre Gasly, who finished in 13th at turn 4. Mick Schumacher was in 8th, followed by Lewis Hamilton, who suffered from even more porpoising, as well as issues with the front brakes. Kevin Magnussen rounded out the top 10, with Lando Norris and Esteban Ocon just behind. Yuki Tsunoda was in 14th, having had a tussle with Lance Stroll, trying to go down the inside of him and getting hit lightly on the nose, this incident leading to him being sent to the steward's room. Guanyu was in 15th, followed by both Aston Martins and the McLaren of Daniel Ricciardo, the Williams pair at the back. Saturday morning saw FP3, in which Max Verstappen once again topped the times, this time setting a benchmark in the mid-132s. Charles Leclerc was just less than a tenth off, despite a nearly costly spin into the turn 11 gravel. Sergio Perez was in 3rd, followed by George Russell, who made it a 3rd P4 in practice in a row with his time of 1:32.9. Carlos Sainz was in P5, just ahead of Lewis Hamilton. Magnussen was in 7th, followed by the 2 Alfa Romeos and Lance Stroll to round out the top 10. Lando Norris was in 11th, the McLaren still not having fully recovered from its braking issues the week prior, and Hülkenberg was in P12. Pierre Gasly was next, followed by Mick Schumacher and Daniel Ricciardo. Fernando Alonso at P16 had an eventful morning in the pit lane, getting a bit too close for comfort with Ferrari's Carlos Sainz, who was released right into the path of his fellow Spaniard. Alex Albon was in P17, followed by Esteban Ocon and Nicholas Latifi. Yuki Tsunoda did not put a single time on the board, the AlphaTauri driver succumbing to a hydraulics leak, forced to remain in the pit lane all session long. Big news came right in between Free Practice 3 and the first qualifying session of the season, as the greatly anticipated report on the FIA's findings after their investigation into the 2021 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix of last year was released. The issues that have been plaguing the mind of every F1 fan has finally been put to rest, as the FIA concluded that the race director was acting in good faith, alongside commenting that, due to the fact that manual interventions generally carry a higher risk of human error, software has been developed that will, from now on, automate the communication of the lists of cars that must unlap themselves. Despite this not being very conclusive, and the aspect of whose fault this incident was still being hugely up for debate, I believe that it is now unequivocally time to let the matter rest here, as we all go into a new season of Formula 1. Moving on to the qualifying session itself, and Ferrari were looking best in Q1, as Leclerc set the fastest time just ahead of Max Verstappen. But at the other end of the pack, Yuki Tsunoda was unable to make it out of the first qualifying session, missing out by 2.5 tenths, followed by Nico Hülkenberg and the Aston Martin, and Daniel Ricciardo, the McLaren looking horrendous at this first race, though this could be due to Daniel Ricciardo's lack of winter testing due to COVID. The Canadian pair of Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi finished in dead last, Alex Albon just about squeezing through to Q2. The second period of qualifying saw Max Verstappen lead both Ferraris, but it was Ocon who finished just outside the top 10, followed by Mick Schumacher, who achieved his best qualifying in F1 so far, and, shockingly once again, Lando Norris, neither McLaren making it out of Q3. Albon was in 14th, with Zhou making it into Q2 at his first Grand Prix, but unable to progress further than 15th. Finally, for Q3, and it was Charles Leclerc who edged Max Verstappen out for pole. His second here at the Bahrain International Circuit, alongside his effort in 2019. Carlos Sainz finished third, with Perez just behind in fourth. Lewis Hamilton achieved damage limitation in fifth, with Valtteri Bottas out-qualifying Hamilton's teammate Russell, who took the Finn seat at Mercedes, who was in ninth. Magnussen returned with a bang in 7th, with Fernando Alonso in 8th and Gasly 2 seconds off the pace in 10th. So, with Leclerc on pole and Verstappen just behind, it was shaping up to be quite the battle on Sunday. The race began on Sunday afternoon, with Ferrari's Charles Leclerc going into turn 1 in the lead, followed by Verstappen and Sainz. Hamilton made the pass on Perez for 4th, followed by a flying Magnussen. The Dane, though, would slip down, going very wide and losing out to Perez. Mick Schumacher was sent for a 360-degree spin by Ocon, which was noted by the stewards, the Frenchman receiving a 5-second time penalty for this misdemeanour. Bottas had a very poor start, slipping to 14th in the first lap alone. But on lap 9, Bottas set about making up for his poor start, overtaking Albon into turn 1. And Sergio Perez made the move on Hamilton a lap later. Lewis was also the first to pit, giving up on his soft tyres and opting for the hards, but had a huge snap of oversteer into turn 1, being overtaken by Zhou Guanyu. Alonso and Schumacher were the next to pit, followed by Sainz and Verstappen, the Spaniard with the fastest of the early stops, with a 2.3 second stop. The next lap, number 16, was Leclerc and Perez's turn, both going for new mediums. The next lap saw a massive tussle between Leclerc and Verstappen out front. The Dutch driver making some crazy moves down into turn 1 on Leclerc from seemingly nowhere before being repassed by Leclerc on the straight leading up to turn 4. At the third attack from Verstappen at turn 1 though, on lap 19, he had a huge lock-up, going wide and slipping back on the Ferrari. Meanwhile, Perez was in 4th and took the fastest lap on the medium tyres, with Norris yet to stop on the same tyre, the Brit slowly slipping down the field over the early laps. Lando Norris finally pitted for the first time on lap 25, falling to the very back of the grid and over a lap down on the leaders, swapping his cooked mediums for hards. Fernando Alonso made his second stop a lap later, going for the hards, and Valtteri Bottas struggled to pass Tsunoda, who scored his first points on his debut here last year. Alonso made the most of his new tyres, making the move on Alex Albon, before Max Verstappen began to complain once again about his flat-spotted tyres. Hamilton pitted on lap 28 for the second time, exiting behind Gasly, before Ricciardo made amends for some of the pain of the weekend so far, moving on Nicholas Latifi for a measly 17th. Tsunoda pitted on lap 30 before Esteban Ocon went down the inside of Mick Schumacher. Max Verstappen pitted a lap later for medium tyres, Leclerc boxing only a lap afterwards, coming 2.2 seconds out in front of Max Verstappen. Hamilton began to make some progress after his early pit stops on lap 33, making moves on both Gasly and Magnussen a lap before Gasly pitted. Sainz and Perez both made their second pit stops on lap 34, along with George Russell, the Spaniard firmly in P3, ahead of Perez. Magnussen made his second pit stop on lap 35 before slipping behind Gasly whilst warming up his new mediums. K-Mag made amends though a lap later, making the move on Pierre Gasly once again at turn 4. Magnussen picked off Guan Yu as well a lap later before Ocon made the move on his teammate for 9th. Lance Stroll's day got even worse as Guan Yu passed Stroll, having pitted a lap earlier before Stroll made his second stop himself, going on to new mediums. Yuki Tsunoda made his way into the top 10 on lap 41, splitting the two Alpines on the softs. Verstappen and Perez shocked almost everyone by going for the 3-stop strategy with only 13 laps remaining. Hamilton made the move on Sergio Perez before Sainz went into the box, followed by Hamilton, and Verstappen began to report some issues on his car at this point, despite throwing up the fastest second sector of all. A lap later, on lap 46, Pierre Gasly's car caught fire after a power failure, bringing out the safety car, adding to the drama. Leclerc took the opportunity to pit under the safety car, as Max Verstappen lost out due to this, and he was still reporting issues as well. Could it go from bad to worse? Magnussen followed suit into the pits as the field bunched up behind the safety car. The race restarted on lap 51, and Leclerc led away. Mick Schumacher slipped back from the top 10, dropping to 12th by the next lap, as Carlos Sainz began to close on the Red Bull of Verstappen, who was still reporting issues. Sainz was able to make the move on Verstappen on lap 54 at turn 4, making it a 1-2 for Ferrari, the first since their last victory at the 2019 Singapore Grand Prix, at the expense though of Max Verstappen, the reigning world champion, retiring at the end of lap 54, promoting Perez to 3rd. Unfortunately, this good fortune would not follow Perez far, the Mexican spinning out at turn 1 of the final lap of the race, slipping out of the points and promoting Hamilton to P3. So Ferrari finished 1-2 in the opening race of the season, Leclerc taking a fantastic victory, followed by Lewis Hamilton in P3, who truly converted damage limitation into an excellent result. George Russell was 4th, followed by Magnussen, who took his first top 5 since Austria in 2018. Valtteri Bottas finished in 6th for Alfa Romeo, followed by Ocon and Tsunoda, who improved on his 9th place finish at Bahrain last year. Fernando Alonso made it a double points finish for Alpine in 9th, and Zhou Guanyu finished in the points on his debut race,